We're going to talk about loneliness first. I want to try and explore some of the solutions to the problems that we are facing. And when I say we, I'm not saying that you are lonely, but there's a very good chance that there's someone you know who is feeling very lonely. And hey, if you are someone who is feeling lonely, if you are looking around and feeling a lack of connection to the people surrounding you, maybe it's time to think about reconnecting with a friend you might have lost touch with. That could be a pretty daunting prospect, granted, but it isn't an impossible task. We're going to talk about how we might do something positive to address the real and present issue of loneliness in Australia. Of course, I invite you to be a part of the conversation. And you know that number, don't you? 1300 222 612. That's 1300 222 612. That is my number, and you can call now.
It's been a challenging year for many, so we're asking you to bring hope to those who need it most. By donating to our ABC Queensland Gives appeal, you'll help our charity partner, the Salvation Army, provide support to thousands of families, the homeless, and those needing emergency relief services during this bushfire season. Together, we can help each other when times are tough. Donate now. Visit abc.net.au/QLDgives.
Kat Feeney on ABC Radio Brisbane.
It is 20 minutes to 1. Each year, for the past 17 years, the philanthropic organisation, the Scanlon Foundation, has tried to quantify the strength of social cohesion in Australia. They do a big survey to assist in this. Alarmingly, this year, it's found social cohesion is at its lowest point since the survey began. So keep that in one part of your brain. Now, here's the other thing you need to consider in the other part of your brain. The landmark State of the Nation report, which was released in August by the Ending Loneliness Together, found that 1/3 of Australians feel socially isolated. And that report cited long work hours, the rising cost of living, and a general shrinking of social circles as contributing factors. Basically, 75% of the 4,000 people who responded believed family and friends should help a person who feels lonely. Clearly, we have a problem. What do we do about it? Father Daniel Hobbs. Now, you are an Anglican priest and a senior consultant at SAS Group. Are you lonely?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm doing okay at the moment. Probably, though, because of two things. One, my wife is my best friend, so that helps. And I also belong to an organisation where I have some excellent colleagues, and those colleagues have essentially become my community.
What happens if, God forbid, you and your wife aren't together and you lose your job, quit your job, leave your job, retire? Then what? Would you be lonely?
Of course, absolutely. My wife jokes that if that were to happen, I'd probably go off and live in a friary somewhere as a Franciscan.
Right.
But
okay. Find company in greener pastures. I guess this is something that happens, though. Things change.
Absolutely, they do.
You might be perfectly content one minute and then incredibly lonely the next. You would see this in your work as a parish priest.
All the time. And there's two parts of that. One is my own experience. Like a lot of us in our 30s and 40s, we start to get married, have a family, have a mortgage, careers take over, and we disconnect from a lot of those friends that we grew up with or went to school with or went to uni with or played sport with, which is something I'm going through at the moment, which is why it's good to have my wife Kylie as my best mate. But a lot of the folk with whom I've shared ministry are older folk, and they're in a very different stage of life, but they're also at a time where their isolation is quite significant. The world is moving very fast. The world has changed a lot. A lot of my ministry was with older females, and from that perspective, a lot of those guys have buried their husbands. And so they're 70, 75 and older and on their own. And so for them, their faith community and their fellow parishioners in a parish community, regardless of denomination, that's not just about God or their faith. That's their home, that's their family, that's their spiritual connectedness.
Also with you this afternoon here on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast is Keri Okanik, mental health social worker from North Brisbane Psychologists. One of the things that can also happen a lot more these days is you move.
Absolutely. There's, a couple of reasons that really predict the dissolution of friendships. Moving is a huge one. You can probably tell from my accent. I moved overseas from Canada. And when I got here, I didn't have any family, didn't have any friends, and really had to rebuild my sense of belonging from scratch.
How welcoming did you find Australia to be?
Very welcoming.
Okay.
I think part of that is the culture is so similar. I speak the same language. I look very similar. Education, crosses over so I can get a job in my field. And so culturally, it was very easy to adjust. And I really felt that sense of belonging because it was so similar.
Did you observe or have you observed anything that might go towards some of the finding in the Scanlon Foundation's report that social cohesion in Australia is at its lowest point since this survey began?
Absolutely. Excuse me. I think particularly with the cost of living crisis, people are working longer hours and people are forfeiting kind of their social experiences as a result of that. So previously, people might have gone out for dinner and a movie on a date, for example, and now they're saying, let's skip it, let's order in, let's watch something on TV. And so how we're interacting in the community has changed quite a bit.
Hobbsy?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we talked about actually just before we came on air was for my Kylie and I, we both grew up in the bush in little country towns. And so if you grow up in a place where there's only 500 people, you can very easily go to the pub for a dinner on Friday night, have a steak, have a few beers, watch footy and walk home. If you live in Brisbane or in the greater Brisbane, southeast Queensland area, where I have friends scattered all over southeast Queensland, and if I want to go out for a meal and have a few beers, but then I have an $80 Uber home, it starts to stack up and everyone's spread out. So it's actually easier to just, as you say, have a pizza, have a few beers, watch some Netflix and stay home.
I also find it curious, given that over the last 20 years, this thing called social media has gone from strength to strength. Initially, when it started, it was all about friendship and connectivity. Is that what's actually happened, though, Keri?
Yes and no. I think that it becomes very easy for people who do experience a lot of social isolation, elderly people, people with disabilities, who it is a lot harder to be in the community participating in events, can find communities of interest, people with shared interests online. And so we can have very fulfilling online communities in that way. The downside of social media, and again, we spoke about this kind of before we came on here, is that because of the algorithms, it does tend to really polarize people to the extremes of different types of issues and different types of interests. And so it's very easy to get caught up in your echo chamber and lose that real dialogue around different things. And that really feeds animosity and hate, and that polarization. It creates a lot more distance between people.
Okay. So how do we bridge that distance? How do we do something about some of the many problems that you guys have identified this afternoon? It's 1:45. You're on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast. My name's Kat. You're with Father Daniel Hobbs and Keri Okanik, psychologist, social worker, mental health social worker with North Brisbane Psychologists. And we're looking at loneliness, the real present problem of loneliness. Now, we don't need to dwell on the consequences of it because anyone who's ever been lonely knows that it's a horrible place to find yourself, but it's not an impossible place to get out of. Keri, I want to talk about school for a couple of reasons. One, when you're maybe actively involved in a school community as maybe a parent or caregiver, that's a network right there. When you're a student at school, again, it's a network right there. We're at the end of a school year. People are graduating. Some kids are moving on and may never see the people they went to school with again, ever. And then maybe you get to a point where you've had all of the kids leave home and all of a sudden that connection to community is over as well. And maybe you're thinking, oh, gee whiz, I wouldn't mind going back to school simply because I could see my friends every day. Is it a good idea to go back to try and rekindle old friendships from, say, your school days?
That's probably the easiest way to start to rebuild our social connections and our sense of belonging, is reaching out to people who we had previously felt connected to. For whatever reason, those connections have kind of gone to the wayside. Generally, when friendships break down, it's not because of interpersonal conflict. It's because of things like moving, changing family dynamics, those kinds of things. And so because there's that familiarity, it can be easier to reach out to those people and reestablish those connections. Research suggests it takes about 200 hours of contact with someone to form a really meaningful friendship. And so if you're thinking about building new friendships, that can seem very daunting. That can seem like a big investment. It's a worthwhile investment, but it's a big investment. So when we reach out to people who we've previously been connected to, what the research suggests is that it's actually about a quarter to half the time to re-solidify those friendships in a meaningful way.
That's really interesting. Hobbsy, have you found yourself thinking about maybe reconnecting with people from, let's say, a past life? Is that something that's on your radar or something you pay any mind to?
It is actually. And one of the things from a bloke's perspective is that we are not good at staying connected. We are not good at it, and it does have a direct impact on our mental health and our well-being. And so one of the things I've tried to do just recently with an old boarding school mate, him and I both grew up in rural Queensland in the 80s. So our sense of humour is pretty vulgar. So the way to stay connected is every now and again, him and I will just share some random, quite disgusting video, but privately, through Instagram or through Facebook, whatever. And we don't say any words, we just send the video. And it's hilarious video stuff. But we do that just with each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll be 3 or 4 weeks, and then I'll just get a message out of nowhere, and vice versa. And it's a really simple way to just stay connected. It doesn't sound like much, but when you were asking before about what are the things we can do, just knowing we are connected is as much as actually physically being with people. Knowing we're connected, the little things, especially if you're busy, the little things like sending some silly meme or having a laugh one-on-one privately with someone, or catching up just for a cup of tea or a glass of beer, whatever. But just those little points, especially if you're busy with your life, those little points really matter.
The thing is, I feel we've been talking about loneliness for a few years now. I feel like we've been identifying this issue, this growing issue, for some time, and we've been saying things like reconnect, reach out, turn up to dance class, join a chess club, whatever. It's just not happening.
No.
Why?
I honestly don't know. I actually thought that when COVID hit and we all got sent home, that would actually spark a reconnection. We in faith community land, we were all having those conversations. Perhaps this is the trigger that will encourage folk to reconnect in some other way through the local community. Wouldn't all be about church, of course, but one of the ways in which they could do that could be through their local faith community, the local church. So far, anecdotally, it hasn't happened. Not in church land anyway.
Keri, what do you observe?
Yeah, I think similar to what we were talking about earlier with the cost of living crisis and people just not being out and about as often. And I think, a lot of those things, like you just said, like join a group, do this, do that, join a class, those things all require money and a lot of time. And so people who are already flat out aren't going to engage in those things. And so I think kind of getting out of our Western cultural bias and looking at how other cultures actually practice friendship, we can see that it's much more common to do kind of like everyday things together outside of the Western culture, like grocery shopping, like going to the gym. And so finding opportunities to do things that you are going to be doing anyways in the company of someone that you enjoy is a really good way to stay connected without actually adding to an already busy schedule.
Quick plug for Talkback Local Radio 2. Great way to stay connected. 1300 222 612 is the telephone number if you'd like to share your thoughts and join some friends in conversation this afternoon. We're here. Hobbsy's here.
Very well played, Kate.
Keri's here. I'm here. This is happening now in real time, face-to-face, actual human beings and no machines. You will need a telephonic device, some sort of machine to connect, of course. It's 10 minutes to 1. My name's Kat and you're on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast. I say what I've just said kind of half jokingly. We're celebrating 100 years of continuous licensed radio at the ABC today. Old school methods of staying in touch can't be undervalued, can they? I mean, writing a letter, sending a postcard. Do we need to get a bit more analogue in our approach beyond just the, everyday kind of mundane, if you like, social experiences, Keri? But Hobbsy, simple, old school ways of staying in touch. I know you're doing memes, but what about a telephone call?
Yeah, correct. Exactly right. Especially, and that was really hammered home to me when I was running a parish during COVID, when I couldn't go and physically visit someone at home, nor could I go into nursing homes. Now, quite often our older folk in nursing homes are already very isolated. COVID made that so much more difficult. So even a phone call, or I have a little labelled up notepad with my name on it and a little Bible verse at the bottom, and I must have handwritten a squillion notes over that couple of years where I could actually send it snail mail, just a little note, thinking of you, blah, 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 blessings, and send it. And then always, 24 hours later, 48 hours later, I get a phone call from that parishioner going, I haven't got a letter in years. This has just come through the mail. But it's having my name on it and having a Bible verse on it or whatever's your jam, that actually worked. And I didn't think about it myself because I was on that way of thinking digitally. I've got to do this, I've got to connect. Particularly when we were really locked down, we couldn't gather for worship. We were doing everything on Zoom on a Sunday morning, was a morning prayer rather than a Eucharist because I obviously couldn't do bread and wine. And I just was in digital mode when COVID hit. And then it just sparked one day. I thought I would just start handwritten notes. And it worked really, really well, particularly for those folk who then received it and felt, again, there's a connection. Our priest was thinking about us.
Is it also, Keri, perhaps a case of beyond just let's do activities together, but let's live life together as friends? Is it also about expanding our understanding of friendship in Australia? I mean, I just feel that there's been always such an emphasis on the romantic expression of love and maybe at the expense of all of the other ways you can express love through friendship, for example.
Yeah, I think there's degrees of friendship. You know, we can have the casual acquaintances that are quite meaningful. Those might be the people that you relate to that maybe you see at work on occasion. You have a nice chat, say hi, have lunch, but that relationship maybe exists in the office. We might have our neighbors who, you know, you'd go hang out at the dog park with and while the dogs play together, but they're not the people who you're going to call and invite out for dinner. And so I think if we look at our friendships or just our relationships as opportunities for friendliness, we feel a lot less alone.
I love that. Opportunities for friendliness. You know, that maybe that's what's been missing. Opportunities for friendliness. I think there's so much hostility and so much space given over to hostility, and we complain and we whinge and we moan. But, you know, standing next to someone at the bus stop and just smiling, that's an opportunity for friendliness. Are you going to be best friends? Well, who knows, maybe, but probably not. But at least that's a genuine and real connection. Those little things may be offsetting this broader sense of loneliness. Hobbsy, in conclusion, some thoughts, please.
I think there's a couple of things. One, the way in which we do our urban design in South East Queensland is going to be a significant contributor to community.
Right.
And that has a significant contribution to connectedness, to friendship, how we all live together, if we're all spread out, catching trains for an hour a day, et cetera, et cetera. So the Olympics is a chance to actually reconfigure some of that urban design in South East Queensland. And finally, on the friendliness side of things, in the English we have one word for love. But in the scriptures, there are multiple words
there you go.
for love.
Yes.
And the one that comes to mind having this conversation is agape, which in the biblical Greek, agape means that I seek only the well-being of the other. It's not romantic, it's not sexual, it's not physical. Agape, I seek only the well-being of the other. Perhaps if we practiced a bit of agape on trains, on bus stops, in the office, wouldn't hurt any of us.
Opportunities for agape. Well, I'm seeing what you're giving and I'm raising it. Keri, your sort of concluding thoughts this afternoon.
I think people often think of friendships, particularly friendship maintenance, as something that's really difficult. And so I challenge everyone to commit to 10 minutes a day to work on their friendships. That could be responding to a text message, sending a meme, sharing a song, giving someone a call that you haven't heard from in a while. It really only takes 10 minutes a day to maintain and strengthen really important friendships that help us feel connected and belonging in our communities.
All right, 5 minutes to 1 on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast. My name's Kat. Father Daniel Hobbs is with you, Anglican priest and senior consultant at SAS Group. And you've just been hearing from Keri Okanik, a mental health social worker from North Brisbane Psychologists. I just wanted to invite Bob to share a few thoughts. Bob, you've been listening this afternoon. What's your point on loneliness and friendship today?
Okay. I'm 75. I'm not short of friends. I've got plenty of good mates. And a few very good lady friends too of my wife's. But I lost my wife 5.5 years ago after 51 years. And we had 51 wonderful years together too. I'm still having a good life, but you can't replace that hole. I don't see the hole in your life. It's a massive shock to you. I don't see any solution to it either. Whether there is, but I can't see any solution to it.
To the whole or the sense of loss you feel for your wife?
Yeah, the sense of loss. Sense of loss, you know.
Well, Hobbsy, Keri, I might ask you for some thoughts really briefly. Hobbsy?
Yeah, Bob, perhaps thinking about that hole that's been left from your wife, rather than thinking of it as a hole that hurts, perhaps think of it as a space of love, remembrance, hope, and all the opportunities and joys you shared.
That's beautiful.
Reframe the space a little bit, mate.
Yeah. Keri?
That is beautiful. Yeah, similarly, I think allowing yourself to experience that grief is really important. And I don't think that any amount of connection or friendship is going to make that grief go away. And so it's through our friendships and through continuing to live a quality life that we start to grow around our grief. And that's really important to think about, is growing around our grief, because that space will stay there.
Bob, hang in there, mate. Thank you so much for taking the time to call. I'm delighted to hear as well you've got a strong network of mates that you can call on as well. My name's Kat. Keri Okanik, thank you very much.
Thank you
for your time. Father Daniel Hobbs, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kat.